If you have spent any time on gaming forums, Reddit threads, or YouTube comment sections over the past few years, you have probably noticed a common theme. Let us start at the most obvious and most talked about issue: price. The price problem. There was a time, not too long ago, when a high-end graphics card cost somewhere between $400 and $600. That was considered expensive, but it was attainable for a serious enthusiast who saved up for a few months. Today, flagship graphics cards routinely cost over $1,000, with some top-tier models pushing past $1,600 or even $2,000. For many gamers, this represents an enormous and unjustifiable leap, especially when wages have not kept pace with this kind of inflation. The justification companies give is usually tied to manufacturing costs, the price of cutting-edge silicon, and the research and development required to push performance forward. There is some truth to this. Producing chips at smaller nanometer processes is genuinely more expensive, and the cost of wafers from foundries like TSMC has increased significantly. However, gamers are quick to point out that company profit margins have also increased substantially during the same period. It is hard to feel sympathy for a company explaining how expensive their product is to make when their quarterly earnings reports show record-breaking profits and stock buybacks. This creates a disconnect. On one hand, executives talk about how difficult and costly it is to produce these chips. On the other hand, shareholders are told about unprecedented growth and profitability. Gamers caught in the middle feel like they are footing the bill for that profitability rather than receiving fair value for their money. Adding to the frustration is the fact that price increases have not always lined up with proportional increases in performance. In some product generations, the jump from one tier to the next offered a reasonable improvement. In others, gamers felt that they were being asked to pay significantly more for only marginal gains, while the truly substantial performance improvements were reserved for the most expensive cards that only a small fraction of buyers could afford. The confusing product, naming and tier structure. Another major source of anger is the way GPU manufacturers structure and name their product lineups. In theory, a naming scheme should make it easy for a customer to understand what they are buying and how it compares to other options. In practice, recent years have seen naming conventions that confuse even experienced enthusiasts, let alone casual buyers trying to make an informed purchase. A specific example that caused massive backlash involved a card initially planned to use a smaller, less capable chip, while being marketed under a name that implied it belonged to a higher performance tier. When this was discovered before launch, public outcry was so intense that the company was forced to cancel the plan and rename the product before release. While this particular situation was resolved before causing direct harm to consumers, it revealed something important. Companies are willing to use confusing or even misleading names if they think they can get away with it, and only intense public pressure stops them. Beyond outright renaming controversies, there's also the simple proliferation of variants. A single generation might include a regular version, a super version, a TI version, an XT version, and various combinations of memory configurations that all sound similar but perform very differently. For someone trying to navigate this without spending hours researching benchmarks, the entire system feels designed to confuse rather than clarify, possibly nudging shoppers toward more expensive options out of fear of choosing the wrong card. VRAM and planned obsolescence concerns. Video memory, or VRAM, has become one of the hottest topics of debate. Modern games, especially with high-resolution textures and ray tracing enabled, can be demanding on memory. Gamers have grown increasingly suspicious that manufacturers deliberately limit VRAM on certain cards to encourage early upgrades, a practice often described as planned obsolescence. The argument goes like this: a graphics card might have more than enough raw processing power to handle a game for several more years, but if it is equipped with an insufficient amount of VRAM, it will start to struggle prematurely, not because the core chip is too weak, but because it simply runs out of memory to store textures and assets. This forces gamers to upgrade sooner than they otherwise would, generating more sales for the manufacturer. Whether this is a deliberate strategy or simply a cost-cutting measure is debated, but the effect on consumer trust is the same either way. When respected technology reviewers run benchmarks showing a card stuttering or experiencing dramatic frame rate drops in newer titles due to memory limitations, while the same chip with more memory performs admirably, it reinforces the narrative that manufacturers are cutting corners specifically on the component that determines a card's long-term usability. This issue is particularly frustrating for the so-called mid-range tier, the price bracket where most actual gamers buy their hardware. Enthusiast flagship cards usually come generously equipped because the manufacturers want them to look as good as possible for these marketing materials and reviews. It is the more affordable cards, bought by the majority of the gaming population, that often get shortchanged, which feels like a betrayal to the everyday gamer rather than the wealthy hobbyist with a four-figure budget. For several years, owning a desirable graphics card at its official suggested price was nearly impossible. Combination of high demand from gamers, a parallel and massive demand from cryptocurrency miners, global supply chain disruptions, and organized scalping operations using automated buying bots meant that stock would disappear within seconds of going on sale, only to reappear on resale marketplaces at 2 or 3 times the original price. Gamers felt powerless watching this unfold. Manufacturers were producing units, certainly, but seemingly not nearly enough to meet demand, and many felt that the companies were not doing enough to prevent bots from buying up entire stock allocations. There were accusations, fair or not, that manufacturers quietly tolerated or even benefited from this situation, since cards were selling regardless of who ultimately purchased them, whether an actual gamer or a reseller. Even after the worst of the shortage ended and cryptocurrency mining demand collapsed, leaving a glut of cards on the second-hand market, pricing did not return to where gamers expected. The new baseline prices set during the shortage years seemed to stick, with manufacturers apparently unwilling to lower suggested retail prices back to where they were before the crisis. This left a lasting impression that the shortage had been used, intentionally or not, as a permanent excuse to reset pricing expectations upward. Marketing, claims, and benchmark controversies. Marketing language used to promote new graphics cards has become another flashpoint. Companies frequently tout dramatic generational performance improvements, sometimes citing numbers like double or even quadruple the performance of a previous generation card. When independent reviewers run their own benchmarks using traditional rendering methods rather than the specific scenarios highlighted in promotional material, the real-world gains are often far more modest. The use of new technologies like frame generation, where artificial intelligence generates additional frames that were not actually rendered by the traditional graphics pipeline, has become especially contentious. These technologies can genuinely improve smoothness and perceived performance in many situations. The criticism arises when marketing materials present frame generation numbers alongside traditional performance numbers without making a clear enough distinction, leading some buyers to believe they are getting a much larger raw performance increase than they actually are. Many gamers feel that comparing a generated frame to a traditionally rendered frame, as if they offer the same value, is a form of statistical manipulation designed to make a generational upgrade look more substantial than it really is. Reviewers and enthusiast communities have pushed back hard against this, demanding more transparency in how performance claims are presented, but the practice continues in various forms with each new product launch. Driver issues and software quality. Hardware is only half of the graphics card experience. Software drivers determine how well that hardware actually performs and how stable it remains during everyday use. In recent years, there have been numerous instances of driver releases causing crashes, visual glitches, overheating issues, or even in rare and serious cases, physical damage to the hardware itself due to faulty voltage or clock management. When these issues occur, gamers expect rapid acknowledgement and a timely fix. Instead, many have experienced situations where problems persisted for weeks or months before an official response was issued, and even longer before a permanent resolution arrived. This slow response time, especially for issues affecting expensive premium products, has eroded confidence that manufacturers are prioritizing quality control and customer support the way they should for products at this price point. There have also been controversies around cards experiencing higher than expected failure rates due to design flaws, with manufacturers initially downplaying the scope of the problem before eventually acknowledging it and offering remedies. The pattern of denial, followed by gradual admission, followed by an inconvenient and sometimes incomplete repair or replacement process, has become a familiar and frustrating cycle for affected customers. Perhaps the deepest source of anger is not any single grievance, but a broader feeling that gamers are no longer the primary focus of these companies. The explosion of artificial intelligence has redirected enormous corporate attention and resources toward data center products and AI accelerators, which command astronomically higher profit margins than consumer gaming hardware ever could. From a pure business perspective, this makes sense. Why would a company prioritize manufacturing capacity for a gaming card that might earn several $100s in profit when that same manufacturing capacity could instead produce an AI chip that earns tens of thousands of dollars per unit? Gamers understand this logic, but understanding it does not make it any less frustrating to feel like an afterthought in an industry that gaming itself helped build and popularize. This shift in priorities has manifested in several visible ways. Consumer GPU releases have sometimes been delayed because manufacturing capacity is being allocated toward AI products instead. Supply of gaming cards has, at times, felt deliberately constrained. Innovation that once went directly into raw gaming performance now increasingly flows into AI-focused features that may or may not directly benefit a traditional gaming experience sold to gamers at a premium regardless. There's also a sense that gaming hardware announcements, once treated as the headline event at major keynotes, have become secondary to enterprise and AI announcements. The era when a graphics card launch was the single most anticipated tech event of the year for millions of enthusiasts seems to be fading, replaced by a corporate focus on server farms and machine learning infrastructure. It would be incomplete to discuss this anger without acknowledging how modern media amplifies it. Technology YouTubers, Reddit communities, and Twitter or X personalities have built substantial followings, partly by being willing to criticize manufacturers harshly, when previous generations of tech journalism might have been more restrained or diplomatic. This more combative reviewer culture has its benefits. Manufacturers have been forced to walk back bad decisions, like the previously mentioned naming controversy, specifically because public backlash, fueled by influential content creators, reached a critical mass quickly. In that sense, the anger, however uncomfortable, has functioned as a genuine consumer protection mechanism, holding companies accountable in ways that traditional regulation or competition alone might not have achieved. At the same time, this dynamic can also amplify outrage beyond what might be proportionate, with algorithm-driven platforms rewarding the most dramatic and emotionally charged takes rather than nuanced analysis. A minor product decision can spiral into a major controversy within hours, and once a narrative of corporate greed or consumer betrayal takes hold, it becomes very difficult for a company to recover trust, even with genuine attempts at improvement or apology. Many gamers point to a lack of meaningful competition as a root cause behind much of this frustration. For years, one manufacturer has held a dominant position in the discrete graphics card market, particularly at the high end, leaving competitors fighting for a much smaller slice of market share. When a single company holds this much market power, there's less competitive pressure to keep prices reasonable or to prioritize consumer-friendly decisions. The argument follows basic economic logic. In a healthy competitive market, if one manufacturer raises prices unreasonably or cuts corners on quality, consumers can simply choose a competitor's product instead, and the offending company suffers consequences in lost sales. When that competitive alternative either does not exist or significantly lags behind in performance or features that gamers actually care about, the dominant company has much less incentive to change its behavior in response to consumer anger. This is part of why so many gaming community members express hope, sometimes desperately, for any sign of stronger competition. Every promising benchmark leak from a smaller competitor or every rumor of an aggressive new product is met with enthusiasm, not necessarily because gamers are devoted brand loyalists to the underdog, but because they recognize that genuine competition is the most reliable lever for improving the entire market for everyone. It is worth pausing to consider why this issue generates such intense emotion in the first place, more so than frustration over pricing in many other consumer electronics categories. For many gamers, their graphics card is not just a component. It is the gateway to an entire hobby, a community, and in many cases, a significant part of their social life and personal identity. Spending months saving up for a card, researching extensively, and finally building or upgrading a system is an experience many gamers genuinely look forward to. When that experience becomes tainted by feelings of being overcharged, misled by marketing, or treated as a secondary priority behind corporate enterprise customers, it cuts deeper than a simple price complaint. It feels like a hobby being commercialized away from the people who built and sustained its culture for decades. This emotional investment helps explain why GPU-related controversies generate such passionate and sustained backlash compared to similarly priced products in other industries. To really understand the depth of this frustration, it helps to compare the current landscape to how things felt in earlier eras of PC gaming hardware. There was a period when graphics card launches felt like genuine celebrations within the community. Enthusiasts would stay up late refreshing forums for leaked benchmarks, debate spec sheets for weeks, and treat launch day almost like a holiday. Prices climbed steadily back then too, but the climb felt tied to genuine, easily understandable leaps in capability. A new card would often deliver noticeably better frame rates, support new visual effects, or make previously unplayable settings finally viable. And the price increase, while real, felt proportional to those gains. Back then, competition between manufacturers was also generally tighter. Multiple companies fought aggressively for market share at every price tier, which meant that consumers genuinely benefited from price wars and feature races. A card released by one company at a certain price point would often be undercut or outperformed within months by a rival, forcing both sides to sharpen their offerings continuously. That dynamic kept the entire market honest in a way that current conditions, with one company holding such a commanding lead, simply cannot replicate. There was also a simpler, more straightforward relationship between marketing claims and actual performance. While exaggeration and selective benchmarking certainly existed even then, the metrics being compared were generally measuring the same fundamental thing: how many frames a card could render through traditional methods. The introduction of complex upscaling and frame generation technologies, while genuinely impressive from an engineering standpoint, has made it significantly harder for an average consumer to directly compare one generation to the next, or one manufacturer's claims to another's. Without digging deep into technical details, most casual buyers simply do not have time for. None of this is meant to suggest that older hardware eras were perfect or without their own controversies. Driver problems, recalls, and pricing complaints have existed throughout the history of the graphics card industry. But many longtime community members describe a noticeable shift in tone over the last several years, from excitement and anticipation to something closer to dread or resignation whenever a new product announcement is scheduled. That shift in collective mood, more than any single specific grievance, may be the clearest evidence that something fundamental has changed in the relationship between gamers and the companies they depend on. Despite the anger, most gamers are not asking for anything unreasonable. The common requests that appear repeatedly across forums and comment sections boil down to a few core themes. They want pricing that reflects genuine value and keeps pace with reasonable expectations, rather than steadily climbing regardless of actual performance gains. They want transparent marketing that clearly distinguishes traditionally rendered performance from artificially generated frames. They want adequate memory allocations across all product tiers, not just the most expensive flagship options. They want faster and more reliable driver support, with quicker acknowledgement of problems when they occur, and they want some indication that gaming customers still matter to companies that built their initial reputations and customer bases entirely on this market. None of these requests are extreme. They reflect a desire to return to a relationship between manufacturer and customer that feels more balanced and respectful, rather than one where the customer feels like a captive revenue source with limited alternatives and limited recourse. The anger gamers feel toward GPU manufacturers did not appear overnight, and it is not rooted in a single decision or controversy. It is the cumulative result of years of rising prices that have outpaced wage growth, confusing product naming, suspicions of deliberately limited memory designed to shorten product lifespans, painful supply shortages that never fully resolved into fair pricing, marketing practices that some view as misleading, persistent software quality issues, and an undeniable shift in corporate priorities toward the far more lucrative artificial intelligence sector. Whether these companies will meaningfully respond to this sustained pressure remains to be seen. History shows that public backlash can occasionally force a correction, as seen in the canceled product renaming controversy. But broader structural issues, like limited market competition and the overwhelming financial pull of the AI industry, suggest that the underlying tensions are unlikely to disappear anytime soon. For now, gamers continue to do what they have always done. Research carefully, share information widely, support each other in finding genuine value, and make their frustrations heard as loudly as possible. Whether manufacturers choose to listen may ultimately determine whether this anger continues to grow, or whether a renewed sense of trust between gamers and the companies that supply their hardware can eventually be rebuilt. There is also a real possibility that the gaming community itself, through its sheer size, organization, and willingness to vote with its wallet, could become the deciding factor in how this story unfolds. Mass boycotts of specific products, coordinated support for genuinely consumer-friendly launches, and the sustained pressure of public criticism have already proven capable of changing corporate decisions in the past. If that collective leverage continues to grow rather than fade, manufacturers may eventually find that ignoring gamers costs more in lost sales and reputation than simply listening to them and adjusting course before anger reaches a breaking point. Thank you for watching, and let us know in the comments which of these issues frustrates you the most, and what you think it would take for GPU manufacturers to start winning back the trust of the gaming community.